Imagine warriors so terrifying that their very name would make enemies tremble. The Berserkers weren't just soldiers, they were the most brutal fighting force in Viking history. But the truth is far more complex than legend suggests. It carries with it tales of fire and steel. It whispers of longships cutting through the grey, unforgiving waves. And in those whispers, one word echoes with a particular chilling resonance: Berserker. These were the warriors of the Viking Age, figures of pure, untamed fury. Their legend paints a picture of men who were more beast than human. They were said to bite their shields in a frenzy. They howled like wolves and fought with a strength that was simply not natural. They seemed immune to the bite of iron and the sting of fire, a terrifying force that could turn the tide of any battle through sheer, unadulterated ferocity. But legends, like the sea itself, can hide great depths beneath a turbulent surface. The image of the mindless, raging brute is a powerful one. It has captivated our imagination for centuries. Yet this simple caricature does a great disservice to the complex reality of these elite Norse warriors. The Berserker was not merely a wild man, he was part of a sophisticated warrior cult, a brotherhood steeped in ritual and ancient tradition. Understanding them requires us to look beyond the blood and the fury. We must peel back the layers of myth and misunderstanding. The truth of the Berserker is a story of psychology and pharmacology. The very name Berserker is a clue. It is a key that begins to unlock the mystery of these warriors. In Old Norse, the language of the Vikings, the word is a compound. It is formed from two distinct parts, ber and zerka. The first part, ber, is most commonly thought to mean bear. The second, serka, simply means shirt or coat. So, a berserker was, quite literally, a bear shirt or a bear coat. This name was not a metaphor. It was a literal description of their appearance in battle. They went into the fight wearing the pelts of bears, powerful symbols of strength and ferocity. Another interpretation suggests the first part of the word is ber, meaning bare or naked. This would mean bare shirt, suggesting they fought without armor. It is possible both traditions existed. This connection to animal spirits is a recurring theme in warrior cultures across the world. The bear was one of the most powerful creatures in the Scandinavian wilderness. It was an animal revered for raw strength, resilience, and its unpredictable fury. To be a bear shirt was to align oneself with these qualities. It was a public declaration of one's martial prowess and spiritual connection. These were not just soldiers, they were members of a distinct warrior brotherhood defined by their patron animal. The sagas also speak of the Ulfetnar, wolf hides, warriors associated with the wolf and pack-like ferocity. Both groups represented a specific spiritual path within Norse martial tradition. Their names tell us that their power was believed to come from a source beyond mere human skill and courage. To truly understand the Berserker, we must look to the heavens of Norse mythology. We must look to the All-Father, Odin. Odin was not just the king of the gods. He was the god of wisdom, poetry, magic, and crucially of war and ecstatic fury. The sagas describe a divine shaping of battle, granting victory to his chosen favourites. His own warriors in Valhalla were the Einherjar. On Earth, his special champions were the Berserkers. They were often called Odin's men. The state of uncontrollable rage they entered was known as Berserkergang. This was not seen as a loss of control, it was seen as a divine gift, a blessing bestowed directly by Odin. In this state, the warrior was filled with the god's own martial spirit. This is why they were said to be impervious to weapons. It was believed that Odin's magic protected them, rendering normal steel and fire useless against their divinely infused bodies. They were not common soldiers. They were shock troops, a terrifying vanguard. Their purpose was to shatter the enemy's morale before the main clash of arms even began. Imagine a disciplined shield wall, the bedrock of Viking Age warfare. Then imagine a dozen men, howling like beasts cloaked in animal skins, charging headlong into that wall. They cared nothing for their own safety. Their wild, terrifying display was a form of psychological warfare. The sagas are filled with accounts of this. The Ynglinga saga, written by Snorri Sturluson, provides a classic description. Odin's men went without their mail coats and were as mad as hounds or wolves. They bit their shields and were as strong as bears or wild bulls and killed people at a blow. Neither fire nor iron told upon them. This was not just poetry. For the people of the time, this was a factual description of a terrifying reality. These were the All-Fathers chosen, and to face them was to face the wrath of a god. They were vessels for a god's fury. The state of Berserkergang was a terrifying spectacle. It did not begin with the clash of battle. It was a process, a ritual transformation that started well before the first sword was drawn. Sagas describe a chilling prelude. The warrior would begin to tremble, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. His face would swell and change color, becoming bloated and dark. This physical change was accompanied by a rising animalistic rage. It was as if a storm was gathering within the man's very soul. A storm that would soon be unleashed upon his unfortunate enemies. It was a terrifying transformation to witness. Once the fury took hold, the berserker was a force of nature. He would let out a guttural howl, the roar of a bear, the cry of a wolf, part of the psychological assault. He would famously bite the rim of his wooden shield, leaving deep grooves in the wood. In the heat of battle, their strength was said to be phenomenal. They fought with a reckless abandon that was utterly unnerving to their opponents. They ignored wounds that would fell an ordinary man. After the battle was over and the Berserkergang subsided, the warrior would be left in a state of utter exhaustion. The divine fire would leave him, and he would be left weak and feeble, sometimes for several days. It was as if the warrior had burned through all his physical and spiritual energy in one spectacular, violent outburst. The gift of Odin was a double-edged sword, granting immense power but demanding a heavy price in return. How can we explain this extraordinary phenomenon in the modern day? The divine explanation satisfied the Norse world, but today we seek answers in science and psychology. One compelling theory suggests that the Berserkergang was a form of self-induced hysteria. Through intense psychological conditioning, ritual, and a powerful belief system, these warriors learned to enter a trance-like state. The rituals, the chanting, the donning of animal skins all served as triggers for this mental shift. This is a dissociative state where the normal conscious self is suppressed and a more primal persona takes over. For years, a popular theory centered on the use of hallucinogenic substances. The fly agaric mushroom, Amanita muscaria, was often cited as a likely candidate. But the known effects, nausea, muscle twitching, lethargy, do not align well with the focused, aggressive rage described in the sagas. Another possibility involves henbane, Hyoscyamus niger, known in the Viking world and used for medicinal purposes. Traces of henbane have been found in a Viking grave in Denmark, indicating familiarity with its properties. In certain doses, it can induce delirium, hallucinations, and a loss of inhibition. Features that could have been exploited ritualistically. Crucially, henbane does not typically cause the lethargy associated with fly agaric, making it a more plausible agent. Ultimately, it may not be a single explanation. A warrior brotherhood, bound by intense loyalty, would engage in pre-battle rituals, rhythmic chanting, dancing, heavy breathing, and hyperventilation to alter their state of consciousness. This psychological priming could have been enhanced by the consumption of potent substances or strong ale. All of this was underpinned by an unshakable belief that they were channeling the power of their war god, Odin. It was this potent cocktail of psychology, pharmacology, and faith that created the Berserker. While the sagas provide vivid literary accounts, we must turn to the earth for physical proof. Archaeology offers a more tangible, though often more subtle, connection to these legendary warriors. One famous piece is a small bronze die from Öland, Sweden. Dating to the Vendel period, it depicts a warrior accompanied by a man cloaked in a bearskin, interpreted as a berserker. He is shown biting the warrior's spear, a striking ritual gesture. At Fyrkat, Denmark, a surprising find deepens the story. A woman's grave, likely a vulva or seeress, contained a small pouch of seeds. The seeds were identified as henbane, linking substances to ritual practice. The Lewis chessmen, an iconic find, also preserve berserker imagery. Several warders bite the tops of their shields, the classic berserker pose frozen in ivory. Used as game pieces, these images show how familiar the image was. There is no skeleton labelled, "Here lies a berserker." Archaeology rarely gives categories so neat, but taken together, artifacts, iconography and botanical evidence, the footprint is compelling. Depictions of animal skin warriors appear in Norse art, reinforcing the literary record. These archaeological footprints confirm berserkers were not just a literary invention. They were a real and significant part of the Viking world, leaving faint but definite traces for us to find. Substances that could induce trance appear in graves and ritual contexts. Iconic behaviour immortalised in game pieces, a tangible echo of a vanished practice. The influence of the berserker extended far beyond the battlefield. They were a powerful cultural symbol. Wild, untamable, feared and revered. In a society that valued strength, the berserker stood at the apex, the embodiment of the martial ideal. They were seen as having a special, dangerous connection to the divine. This gave them a paradoxical status, essential for victory, yet feared for unpredictability. Their rage, once unleashed, was not always easily controlled. In some stories, berserkers are heroic champions, loyal bodyguards who win great victories. However, in many later sagas, the berserker is cast as a villain, wandering thugs, bullies who terrorize communities. They challenge honest farmers to duels, to steal land, wealth, and even wives, a menace to social order. Communities reacted. Law codes and assemblies moved to control such behavior. A society grappling with its own values, balancing the need for martial prowess with the need for order. As Norse society settled and professionalized warfare, there was less room for unpredictable, individualistic warriors. Warfare became more about discipline, strategy and organized formations, roles the berserker could not always fulfill. When heroes stood up to berserkers and restored peace, they were cast as villains in a changing moral landscape. Presented as heroes, albeit terrifying ones, their story mirrors social evolution. From tribal warrior society to organized medieval kingdom, the berserker transformed from divine champion to demonic throwback in the collective memory. The age of the berserker could not last forever. The very forces reshaping Norse society would eventually lead to their demise. The single most important factor was the arrival of Christianity in Scandinavia. The new faith emphasized humility, peace and control over base instincts. This was the polar opposite of the berserker ethos, which celebrated ecstatic rage and a connection to pagan gods like Odin. The Church saw berserkergang not as a divine gift, but as demonic possession. As Christianity took root, kings and lawmakers began to suppress pagan practices. In the early 11th century, Jarl Eiríkur Hákonarson outlawed berserkers. Iceland's law code, the Gragas, imposed severe penalties on anyone who went into a berserk rage. A man experiencing berserkergang could be sentenced to lesser outlawry, temporary banishment. If witnessed, the penalty was full outlawry. He could be killed on sight with no legal consequence. The professionalization of warfare reduced the tactical need for unpredictable shock troops. As armies became organized, there was less room for an unpredictable individual. The shock role was increasingly filled by armored knights, controllable, predictable assets. A chaotic, headlong charge was less effective against disciplined lines. By the 12th and 13th centuries, when many sagas were written down, the berserker was already a figure of the past. Writers living in a Christian world looked back and recast berserkers as dangerous relics. The roar of the bear shirt faded from battlefields, replaced by church bells and royal pronouncements. Though the berserker himself has vanished into the mists of history, his shadow looms large over our modern world. The word berserk has entered the English language. We use it to describe a state of wild, uncontrollable fury. When we say someone has gone berserk, we invoke the memory of those Norse warriors. The legend has outlived the reality, becoming a metaphor for unleashed human rage. From fantasy novels to video games and films, the Berserker is constantly reinterpreted. He represents a tantalizing question about the limits of human potential. Could a person, through sheer force of will, ritual and belief, become immune to pain? The Berserker exists at the boundary of what we consider humanly possible. He is a symbol of the beast that may lie dormant within us all. In our safe, ordered world, we are both terrified and captivated by the idea of someone who could cast off civilization and become a pure force of nature. From comic heroes to heavy metal, the spirit of the Berserker is reborn again and again. He has become a global symbol of warrior ferocity, detached from his specific Norse origins, still retaining that core essence of untamed power. He is a myth we continue to tell ourselves. Ultimately, the story of the Berserker is a profound reflection on the nature of humanity itself. It shows us that the line between man and beast, civilization and savagery, is a thin one. It reminds us of a time when gods were thought to walk the battlefields and grant their power to mortal champions. The Berserker challenges our modern, rational understanding of the world and forces us to acknowledge the power of belief. The terrifying, awe-inspiring potential that lies hidden within our own nature, waiting for the right call to be unleashed.